Hi there, and welcome to our review of the GCSE paper. This is going to go through the different types of questions that are involved, the different types of skills that are involved, and also show you some WAGOLL answers, what a good one looks like as well. Hopefully it helps. So the first type of question you're going to get is a 4-mark question, and it should ease you into the paper. So what you have is a list of 4 different potential words at the top, and you have to try to look at the questions below. There's 4 of those, and you have to try to place the right answer into the right box. Now, one of these questions has been done for you. In this case, you can see it's ghetto, so you will have to stroke out that word and make sure you do not use that. Some students make the mistake of actually using that word again. As long as you've stroked it out, that won't be the case. And hopefully these should be relatively easy facts once you've did all your revision. What we would suggest really is that you go through and you stroke out the different words, the different answers as you do them. Okay, so the answers you'll definitely know. If you are unsure of one, well, hopefully it's just one and it'll be the last one left. Okay. What we would suggest for this should be relatively easy. So it's 4 minutes on the CCEA guidance, but we reckon you can get this done in about 2 minutes. You should be able to get this done, no problems, as long as you make sure your answers are correct. Okay, so hopefully it's useful. The next type of question you will get is a question 2. This is a 3 and a 3 marker, okay, so it's worth 6 altogether, and it's asking you to describe something. So you should be allowed about 5 minutes for this. It should be relatively easy. You just have to make sure you get your marks. What's very common is that students race through this here and don't actually get the 3 marks. It's worth 3 marks each. Don't forget to develop your point. So you should have a key point and be able to develop it with 3 developed sentences. That's usually the best way to go. So in this case, always link back to the question asked. In this section here, it's describe 2 ways African Americans were discriminated against in the United States in the 1920s. So you can see here the red is where I'm stating the key points. So Jim Crow laws is a good example of this. So Jim Crow laws were in place across the southern United States. And then I went on to develop it. And what's really important, I think, here is the use of the full stop, because it sort of shows that there's 3 different elements to this answer and 3 marks. So Jim Crow laws were in place across the southern United States. These set of discriminatory laws were used to segregate based on race. Okay, so I'm developing my point. An example then. So an example would be that African Americans would be confined to the back of public transport. Okay, then I do the same again. In the North, African Americans faced discrimination. They often had to do the most dangerous or poorly paid jobs, such as on the railroads or in chemical works, and they were often hired last and fired first. Again, I've got my key point that in the northern states in the USA, they face discrimination, and I've given 2 examples of how that's actually happened. And that should be my marks in the bag, so 3 and 3. Just make sure you develop your answers, make sure you use full stops to show the 3 elements of your answer. The next question is a 6-mark question. So question 3 is 6 mark. Again, it's always based on facts at this point. Okay, so it's based on factual knowledge and explanation. And literally this is where you're using your golden nuggets. You're using your key golden nuggets, your knowledge, to show as much as you know about a particular topic. Be aware that you get 2 choices here, okay? Choose the one that you can write the most about. You have to make sure you choose the part chosen, so just write in whichever one you've chosen at that section and then really explain it well. Okay, so go through. You should be able to be honest to tick 6 clear points. I usually have an extra point as well too as a security, but you should be able to have at least 6 points in your answer. So in this case, if I was doing cinema or spectator sports, well, I'm going to choose cinema, and I'm going to try to get as many key points as possible. So look at this answer. Okay, the cinema was one form of entertainment that boomed in the 1920s, United States, 1 mark. It's estimated that up to 100 million people, 100 million Americans, would go to the cinema each week, 2 marks, 2 facts. There were up to 300,000 cinemas by the end of the decade, 3 facts. California became the centre of world cinema due to its good light and warm climate, 4. The big 5 studios like Warner Brothers and MGM worked from there, 5. Movie stars like Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd became world famous, 6. and my bonus one just for security. Some, like Clara Bow, would influence women's fashion, and they've got a 7, so it'll be, hopefully I'll get my 6 for that. So just to look in spectator sports just to see. So remember, you get a choice, you don't have to do both of these. I've just given you 2 examples here. So spectator sports, if I was doing that, this is what I would put down. So spectator sports was one form of entertainment that boomed in the 1920s United States. Okay. The invention of radio made it hugely popular across the country, with people being able to follow their favourite teams. The car made it possible to visit the huge stadiums being built to watch these sports. Stars such as Babe Ruth became very famous in baseball. Jack Dempsey became the first boxer to gain $1 million for a fight. The NFL, the National Football League, was established in 1920. Again, I've got my all key 6 points here that I would need. Okay, so hopefully this explanation question comes across well. You're sort of counting your factual nuggets as you go through. Okay, quick is an explain question too, but this one here needs to be a bit more developed. It needs to be detailed, be selective, be very focused on how you answer this. Okay, so it's slightly harder. It'll require statistics, it'll require lots of knowledge as well too to help you out. So in this case, you get 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes to do this in as much detail as possible. So in this example here, it's asking you to describe the changes made to the lives of women in the 1920s. So I've tried to structure this slightly better, okay? I've developed it politically, economically and socially. So the lives of women changed a number of ways. Firstly, politically, women were rewarded the vote in the 19th Amendment of 1920. This gave them a great deal of political freedom. They formed groups such as the WAGOLL, which had 10 million members. Again, you can see the full stops being used. It's sort of separating the different points that I want marked. Helped to produce landmark laws, good example here, Shepherd-Towner Act, which gave women paid maternity leave. Women also began to gain positions of power, such as Nellie Taylor Ross, who became governor of Wyoming. Economically, women began to gain more jobs. Up to 2 million were employed in the 1920s in positions such as secretarial or telephone work. Their increased economic power was demonstrated with new products such as rayon and the success of companies like Estee Lauder. Socially, women became more liberated with the likes of the flappers. These women went unchaperoned and wore shorter, more revealing clothes. They smoked, listened to jazz, and danced to the Charleston. So you can see there's clearly 3 different areas that I've got, and there's lots and lots of facts, statistics, knowledge of like different acts. It's all in there. That'll get you your full marks. The 16 mark question is always going to be 2 different sides of an argument. Okay, so it's an essay question. You should set aside 15 to 20 minutes for this. It should be very well argued, and it has a statement. You have to make sure you agree or disagree with it. Okay, so what you do here is introduce the answer, set the scene, what it's going to be. Okay, show you know that there's both sides. Make sure you make a judgment, and okay, have to make a judgment. And aim for 2 paragraphs. One is going to argue about the proposition. Okay, it's going to argue yes or no about the proposition. The other one's going to be a counter argument to that proposition. And again, you have to make that judgment. Try to make it an introduction and a conclusion if you can, just to make sure you've got that sorted. This question here is asking, the example is asking about the Great Depression. So American industry, the lives of workers were more affected by the Great Depression than agriculture and rural farmers. Do you agree? So it's basically industry versus agriculture. Who is the most affected by the Great Depression? So you have to make a judgment. You have to have one side, you have to have the other side, and you have to make that final judgment as well. So American industry and the lives of workers were deeply affected by the Great Depression. I've used the question to start my answer. It links it up very well, anchors it. However, I believe that the lives of farmers and agriculture were perhaps worst hit by the Great Depression. So I've made my judgment. Okay. And then I'm going to go down the proposition side here. So American industry and workers were hit hard by the Depression. The Wall Street crash led to huge economic effects. Up to 10,000 American banks went bust, with many Americans losing their savings. The Bank of New York collapsed with 400,000 people losing their money. The Depression led to a 46% decline in industrial production, with more than 100,000 businesses shut. The effects on employment were huge, up to 13 million people unemployed, This was 1/4 of the workforce. Many people became reliant on soup kitchens and charity. In New York, 45 people starved to death, and Philadelphia went bankrupt trying to deal with the downturn. So you see here, sprinkled with facts the whole way through. You're arguing one side of the argument here, and you're doing it in a good way because you've got lots of evidence. You then have to do the other side, okay? So the other side of the argument then, okay, is this. However, that however is a good way to start the counter argument, okay? It's a good pointer. American agriculture was perhaps the worst affected, okay? That tails into my judgment. It had suffered throughout the 1920s when most of America had prospered. Many farmers were already in huge debt due to loans for mechanisation. They could not repay these loans, and rural banks especially were decimated by the Depression, causing millions to lose their savings. To make matters worse, the price of crops was affected. Wheat dropped to $14 a tonne due to overproduction. It became cheaper to burn than transport it. 750,000 rural farms went bankrupt in the Depression. Many were forced to move across the United States to California in the hope of a job. These were often nicknamed Okies, as many came from Oklahoma. They would try to get transportation by getting on trains. They would sleep in drainage ditches. They would live in shanty towns often called Hoovervilles. The Dust Bowl was another natural disaster rural communities had to deal with. The soil was often so overused that hundreds of thousands of tons of topsoil was blown away in the hot summers of the mid-1930s, turning the sky red and even killing cattle and people. Therefore, in conclusion, the Depression affected many groups, but it could be argued that the rural agricultural communities were affected most. I finish with conclusion, which matches my judgment. So hopefully that makes sense. This one here to prepare for, you go through your tables, any form of question that has two different sides. There could be minorities, who suffered the most. Is it African Americans? Is it Native Americans? Is it immigrants? It could be about women, whether women were liberated in the 1920s or not. Any form of question that has two different sides to the argument, that is how I prepare for this question. If you do that well, you are well sorted to get the 16 out of 16. Thanks for listening.